Okay, in this video, we're looking at, are there too many teams in Sydney in the NRL? Now, I've listed all the NRL teams that are based in and around Sydney with the St George Illawarra Dragons, because they do play some home games in Sydney because of the joint venture nature of the club. But I put all their premiership titles up, not minor premierships, one. I would have run out of space on the board, and also all the wooden spoons. Together, you combine all their silverware. There are 60 premierships between the clubs based in Sydney and 39 wooden spoons. So they're more successful than they're not as a whole. Parramatta, 4 premierships, 14 wooden spoons since 1947. Yeah, there was a big debate until very recently that they should be moved out of Sydney. They've signed the lease on the new stadium in the western suburbs, the Western Sydney Stadium, for 15 years. They and the West Tigers going nowhere. Between them, 5 premierships. The Bulldogs, Roosters, and Rabbitohs, look at between them. They've got how many premierships? Was it 35? 4. They've got 43 premierships between them, and they're 3 of the oldest clubs. They are not leaving the Sydney area. You cannot put that past the fans and the members, because I believe the members would have a say whether the clubs are financially viable. The Rabbitohs Roosters rivalry is one of the biggest rivalries in Australian sport, and is one of the most watched fixtures in Australian sport. If that's on the telly, people all over Australia watch that, even outside of Sydney. But the Bulldogs have 8 premierships and 5 wooden spoons. The Roosters have 14 premierships, 5 wooden spoons. The Rabbitohs have 21 premierships and 8 wooden spoons. You ain't moving these clubs. Even though the Rabbitohs spent 3 years out of the NRL in the late 90s, early 2000s, and I can look at that, these clubs ain't moving. The Sharks have 1 premiership in recent times, obviously 2016, a couple of minor premierships and a few runners-up medals. They have 3 wooden spoons as well. The thing is with the Sharks, they're the only club in the NRL to own their stadium. All the other stadiums are owned by other people and are leased. So the Sharks, in that sense, they're not going anywhere. They own where they play. They're not budging. And there's been a big talk. They should be moved out. They're not going anywhere. The Panthers, now we're getting onto clubs that possibly could get moved. The Panthers, they have 2 premierships, 4 wooden spoons. They're going nowhere. Personally, they could do really, but they've got a strong fan base. They regularly sell out the stadium down at Panther Stadium. They regularly sell out. They're a solid, if not outstanding, NRL team. But hey, they're more successful than some other clubs on the board. So I can't see them getting moved. West Tigers, we've already discussed. They've also on the lease for the Eels' new stadium in Western Sydney. They have had financial issues. They've regularly been touted, a club that's got to move, but they're a joint venture club. And the NRL, I think, wants them to succeed in Sydney because they've merged the Balmain Tigers and the Western Suburb Magpies together. I've done a video on the Tigers and the Magpies. Yeah, oh, well, yeah, the Magpies. Oh dear. The issue with the Tigers is they inherited the financial issues of the 2 clubs that merged together. And they've also inherited the lack of success of the Magpies towards the end of the Magpies' existence as a club. They inherited that lack of success going forward, and Jesus Christ, I feel sorry for Tigers fans that have had to endure so much. They've only had 3 finals appearances. They're not a very successful team. Even though they got a premiership, they're not a very successful team. And the debate is, they're not successful, they're not winning in Sydney. Move them. Just by moving a team doesn't mean you're going to get success. It sometimes happens, but not often. And professional sports leagues now are very adverse of moving teams out of locations and relocating. It was more done in the 80s and the 90s, the 70s, 80s and 90s in leagues like the NHL and the NFL and the Major League Baseball in North America. The joint ventures was a late 90s thing. It hasn't happened since then. So the debate has been going on for 20 years. The NRL doesn't want to do it. If the NRL wanted to do it, it would have happened. That's my debate. The TV rights deal is up in a couple of years. Then the option about expansion or relocation comes up on the table. But as far as I know, the NRL doesn't have the willingness to do anything. The Sea Eagles, I think, are the candidate if you are to move a team. They don't own their stadium. The Brookvale Oval is actually in a suburban park, so the pitch regularly gets destroyed by park goers who play frisbee and walk their dogs and go camping and have barbecues. So the pitch is never in the best of condition. They've got 8 premierships. No wooden spoons. They're a very successful side in the Sydney area. Actually, they'll be the 3rd most successful team in Sydney because they've got no wooden spoons. Canterbury have wooden spoons. But in recent times, they haven't been very successful. and there's no hiding from that fact. They have not been successful in recent years, and that's a concern going forward. They're not winning at the moment. Uh, they've had a poor few seasons, and the debate is, they're struggling, move them. I don't think it's going to happen, but they're probably the most likely candidate. If you were to move a team, there's your candidate. The St George Illawarra Dragons I've put on here because even though they play most of their home games in Wollongong, the Illawarra Steelers are a Sydney-based team historically, another joint venture club. To be fair, if it was going to happen, they'll just move permanently to Wollongong and they would just drop the Illawarra part of the name and just go back to be the St George Dragons that they were before. They would just completely break the joint venture and go back to just being in Wollongong. That means they're outside Sydney. They've got a premiership. Now, the Bulldogs, Roosters and Rabbitohs play in these big stadiums like ANZ, Allianz and the SCG because I believe is it the Allianz Arena's being rebuilt. So it looks bad on live TV when you've got half-filled stadiums, but actually their fan bases are strong and large. So are there too many teams in Sydney? Well, the debate was had 20 years ago, and we've got 2 joint venture teams out of it. And the Norths are now in reserve grade. But look, Cronulla still going. Canterbury still going. The Roosters still going. The Eels still going. Rabbitohs still going. Eagles, Seagulls still going. Dragons, Steelers, okay, they've merged. But look, the thing is, you've still got 8 teams that are based purely in Sydney and another team that's partly based in Sydney. If the NRL thought there were too many teams or it wasn't financially viable to have teams in Sydney, we would have less teams in Sydney. I think what's more likely to happen is instead of relocating these teams in Sydney is a 2-team expansion. I think you're going to see a team end up in Perth and you're going to see another team possibly New South Wales, possibly Brisbane, possibly South Island of New Zealand going forward. If you look at it outside of Sydney, the success is not shared evenly. Brisbane, most successful team, I think, outside of Sydney as a whole. You know, North Queensland, only the one premiership to their name and a fair few wooden spoons in there as well. Not a very successful side in the real scheme of things, although they've made a lot of finals footy in recent years. The first half of their existence, they weren't great. The Gold Coast Titans, 3 finals appearances and a wooden spoon in there. Not a great history, much like West Tigers. Not great. The Newcastle Knights, 2 premiership titles, a lot of wooden spoons in recent times. No one's saying the Newcastle Knights need to be moved out of Newcastle. Not at all. And then you've got to look at Melbourne Storm. They've had premiership stripped, but they're the most successful side in the NRL era. No one's saying that they've got to move out of Melbourne, even though their financial off-field issues have been raised in the past about their finances. They're not getting moved. The New Zealand Warriors, they're there for a reason. Is to grow rugby league in New Zealand. There's a reason why they're there. The Canberra Raiders haven't been successful in recent times, but again, the Australian capital, Canberra, no one's asking them to move. So while there are a lot of teams in Sydney, most of you've got to look at where the economy of Australia is and the heartland of rugby league. We had the same debate here in the UK about growing the game in the south of England in the Super League. Rugby league is most prominently played in the Sydney and East Coast areas. That's where clubs are going to go. It's where the demand is. I do think when the next TV deal is up for negotiation, yes, I think expansion over relocation is going to be on the agenda. I think they're going to look at Perth, they're going to look at Brisbane and South Queensland. They're going to look at the South Island of New Zealand, and I think they're not going to touch Sydney. I really believe that. I think they're going to keep it as is. The rivalries that are there put bums on seats. The Eels, Sharks, Panthers, Dragons, Eagles, they regularly sell out. The Dragons maybe not sell out as much. Sea Eagles, lack of success. But the clubs that people are saying should be moved are not moving anywhere. But that's my view on it. I think you could debate there are too many, but we've had this debate for 20 years. And if you were to move a team, it's very difficult. Parramatta have a long-term lease on their stadium. West Tigers are also on that lease for some of their home games, so they're not going anywhere. Cronulla own their stadium. Then you're down to Penrith and Manly possibly, but they've got strong links with the suburban communities that they're based in, and then you're down to the Rabbitohs, Roosters, and Bulldogs, and then they're not going to go anywhere because they're the big clubs in Sydney, and the Dragons, they play most of their games in Wollongong anyway. I don't think there's going to be any change on the amount of teams in Sydney. Absolutely not. I think if anything, the league is going to expand by 2 more teams, and you may see Norths come back and have a team at first grade, possibly. I cannot see any movement of teams being moved out of Sydney, though the debate is strong to do so. I can't see it being done. At least not for a long time, unless one of these teams really hits financial problems. Like that makes the West Tigers or Cronulla financial issues look like child's play. Unless a team really hits the wall financially, I can't see a team being moved out of Sydney at all, because all the teams in Sydney actually draw fans and have over 100,000 members each. So I can't see that happening. But stranger things have happened in sports. Anyway, I'm going to leave that there. Thank you very much for watching. Do you think there are too many teams in Sydney? Place your comments in the thoughts and thoughts in the comment section below. Don't forget that like and subscribe button are absolutely vital to the channel's growth and success. Please hit them up if you like what you see, and I'll have some more videos for you soon.